Hey guys, Jeff Manchester here, Manchester Music. This video is a follow-up video that I did a while ago called Buying New Monitors, A Beginner's Guide. Now that video has gotten a lot of traction, a lot of views, and at the end of it, I say that I'm going to do a follow-up video on how to monitor and how I monitor, and there's a lot of interest, and I haven't done it for like 8 months, so today is the day we're going to do it. So this video is going to basically talk about the importance of monitoring in a good room. What do I mean by a good room? If you have a high noise floor, you've got the fridge buzzing, you've got traffic in the background, you've got someone playing music over there, you've got maybe a couple of amps that are turned on, giving some self noise, it's just audible enough. If you've got a room without any absorptive materials, high ceilings, if you've got a room with no diffusion, nothing to bounce the sound off of and break it apart, you might not be making the best decisions about what your music needs. More high-end, less bass, more mid-range, because your room is giving you a very inauthentic representation of the sound of your music. So it's a bit like color correction. Ian Shepherd has this great metaphor that listening to music and mixing and mastering in a bad room is a bit like doing color correction, which is the process of, in post-production and video, making sure the trees look green and the people look human and the sky looks blue. It's a bit like doing color correction while wearing green tinted glasses. You have this sort of shade on and it's distorting all of your decisions and maybe making you make poor decisions. And so when it gets to the end user, they're looking at this video, if we stick with this metaphor, and going, why are all the colors so funny? Like, this doesn't make any sense. It's the same thing with your room. If you have a poor room with none of those things, you'll make decisions based on not what's actually coming out of the speakers, but you'll make decisions based on what the room is doing to the sound. And then, you put your stuff in there and it sounds like a mess. So that's really, hopefully that highlights the importance of having a good room, and that's what we're going to talk about in this video. I'm going to do some referencing as well. I've got my Focal Solo BEs. I've got my Yamaha NS10s. We're going to listen to one sound source. It's going to be in mono. Unfortunately, I don't have two microphones to mimic how my ears hear the music, but we're going to listen to two sound sources, and then I'm going to say, I'm going to discuss how those speakers color the sound and how you should make choices based on what you're hearing, all the rest of it. The last thing I'm going to say is this video is sort of going to be a one-man show. It's a small space, and if I had someone help me hold the camera and the microphone, it might be a little less seasicky. Hopefully you don't get seasick, and I'll try and make a nice smooth video where I show everything, but this is a very low budget production, so bear with me. Anyway, let's jump right into it. Hello, welcome, Jeff Manchester here. So this is the video on my room and sort of how I listen, and this is going to be where we're going to be looking from for the next little bit here as I hold the camera and the microphone. So as you can see, I've got to the furthest sort of reaches my Yamaha NS10s. I've got my amp under that's powering them. That's a little blue light on the far right. I've got my Focal Solo BEs next, and then I have my Mac Pro and my monitor and my controller, and underneath the desk I've got my very sneaky little keyboard right there and some detergent. Important pieces of kit in any producer's setup. I'm just kidding. So the first thing I want to point out is I've got my speakers a good distance away from the wall. I could have them a bit further, but if I go behind here, you can see they're a little bit away from the wall. They're sort of coming into contact with one of my first my little panels here that I've got Roxul Rockwool inside. Google is your friend. Take a look at that. Roxul Rockwool. It's a very good absorptive material, good coefficient on that, so it's able to suck up a lot of the first reflections. See right there, I've got that a far distance away from the wall too. It could be a little further. This might be one of those do as I say, not as I do things. The reason you want it far away is you don't want the low-end information that's happening in the crossover and then eventually getting out the bottom of the monitor here. You don't want any of that buzzing against the wall and creating a sort of, like this weird sort of feedback loop where it's humming against the wall and the wall is humming and vibrating against the speaker, and then you just don't get a very good image of what the low end sounds like. My Yamaha NS10s are pretty far away, but they don't produce a lot of low end. In fact, they're near field mid-range monitors. They represent the mid-range very well. They're sort of, you'll see these a lot in different studios all over the world. These are Yamaha NS10Ms. They're the second edition or iteration of the NS10s, and they're quite good. You might have seen little pieces of paper put over the tweeters in the first iteration of the NS10s. That's what people did. They sounded a bit too shrill. I think it was Bob Katz or something that used to do that, and then everyone sort of followed suit. But we're getting off on a bit of a tangent here. So anyway, so what I want to point out here as I sit down is speaker listening position. If I'm sitting in front of my computer like this, I want to make sure that I am sitting at an equal distance away from these monitors. So we want to form like a nice little triangle. So I want to be, I guess it's like an equilateral triangle. So I want my head to be as far away from the speakers as they are from each other. So I'd say that's about maybe 4 feet away. They're 4 feet away from each other, and I'm 4 feet. If I turn the camera here, I'm 4 feet away from them. And that just makes for a very good phantom center and listening experience. The same thing goes for the NS10Ms. They're a little far away from each other, but I'm not so worried about the phantom center on the NS10Ms as much, because these guys, my Solo BEs, the Focals, these are sort of the most important sound sources for me. So, but basically, I've got the NS10Ms pretty far apart. You want to make sure they're angled properly, so you're not getting one side of the music, one sort of angle of music into your ears faster than the other. You want the sound to be arriving at the same time, so there's no phase issues. You don't want anything in front of your speakers either. I see a lot of people put their monitor sort of at the edge of their speaker or something. I'm kind of breaking that rule with my mic arm, but that's really in between the cone and the tweeter on the NS10M. I'm not too worried about that. So, but I see a lot of people, they're kind of, they've got crap sort of around their speakers. They've got their speakers angled maybe toward the table, so their speakers are on like a mount, and then they're sort of angled inward so that the speaker is sort of facing the table like this, if that makes sense. So mine are out that like this. Some people put their speakers out like that, and that's not really a problem, but you have to be aware that the sound is going from the tweeters and the woofer and the main section here and hitting the table and bouncing off, and that's a first reflection point, and you want to mitigate those. You don't want those. You want the sound to be arriving at you just sort of pure, and not hitting anything, especially not hitting anything that close. So that's a first reflection point that you want to just at least be aware of and sort of mitigate. The other thing I want to point out is I'm sitting at my computer and my head is here, and my ears are sort of at the tweeters, these beryllium tweeters here. They're sort of right where those are, and that's best practice. I mean, some people don't follow that rule, but your ears should be hitting right where the tweeters are. If you're going to be listening for a long time, the high frequency tweeter should be right where your ears are. That's one thing that engineers say. I'm not sure how true it is, but that's something that I follow, and I find that I get a pretty good representation of those frequencies when I'm sitting in that position. Obviously, it's a do as I say, not as I do thing with the NS10s, because they're a little lower than the Focals. That's because they're lower in priority, and I don't really have speaker stands for those guys yet. They're just on a bunch of books. It's actually a really good book. Listen to This by Alex Ross of The New Yorker. Anyway, getting off on a bit of a tangent here. But one thing you might want to do if you're worried about first reflections and catching those is do the mirror trick. And this basically has you holding a mirror up against the wall of where your speaker's first reflection point would be, which in my case would be right over here. In this case, for this speaker on the left of the screen, it's sort of more over that way, and I'm not too worried about that one. There's more space for that to travel in. But for this one here, you put a mirror on the wall. In this case, it would be this wall, and you drag it. I emulate it here. You drag it until you see that speaker, and that is basically going to tell you where the sound coming out of that speaker is going to land on the wall and where to put your first acoustic panel. In my case, they're over here. I have a couch which is also absorbing some information there, but so that's really important. You want to catch those first reflections and either absorb them or diffuse them so that they don't have as much energy with which to travel. So that's really important. I'm trying to think of what else here. Why don't we do a bit of monitoring? First, I'm going to monitor out of my Solo BEs, and you can hear what that sounds like, and then I'll do some monitoring out of my NS10s, and we'll talk about what those sort of sound like. So let's get to that right now. So in this video, I'm going to monitor on the Solo BEs just to piece off my SoundCloud, and I'll put the camera sort of in front of the monitors, and I'll sit back to where I would normally listen, and I'll have my microphone there as well, so you can hear what I would be hearing in a sort of mono way if I was in front of my speakers, and you can hear the sound of the Focals, and then we'll do the exact same thing with the Yamaha NS10s, so you can hear what we're hearing there too. Anyway, let's get started. So now let's do a bit of a test. I'm talking off axis here. Now let's do a bit of a test with the NS10s to see how that same passage of music sounds when it's coming out of a different set of speakers. Okay, so let's talk about what we just heard. The first test that I did, we heard the solo BEs, and those have a very sort of punchy low end. It's very well represented, and I feel like we could really get a sense of that with the track that we put through those speakers. Other aspects of the frequency spectrum are well represented too, but I feel like the low end and the mid range, especially out of the BEs, like it's very pronounced and I can hear it. It's also clear and neutral, but it's still there in a way that maybe was not there with the Yamaha NS10s because they don't really have a lot of frequency response, probably under about 200 hertz or maybe 300 hertz. I'm listening when I hear the focals, I'm listening to how the low end sounds, if it's overwhelming, if it's over the top. I might put my my headphones on. I've got some, these are the ATH M30Xs. These are pretty standard. You'll see these all over the place. Very flat, very clear, but that's also a really good way to get a bass check too. Listen on your monitors. You're very, not boomy, but listen to monitors that represent low end efficiently, and then do a little sound check with your headphones. If you're mixing on Beats headphones, don't. That's sort of like the analogy of color correcting with green tinted glasses. Just stop doing it. I don't want to. We're not going to do a rant about that. But these guys are very flat, very good, and they're pretty cheap. It's only like maybe $150, and that's cheap for studio monitor headphones or monitoring headphones. When it comes to the Yamaha NS10s, I mean, we're really hearing the mid-range there, right? And the reason people really like the NS10s, first of all, they're just a great sort of legendary speaker. They have this sort of history about them, and there's a couple websites just solely devoted to the evolution of the NS10. So they have a sort of magical mystique about them. But the reason people like them is that the saying goes, if you can make something sound good on an NS10, they used to be sort of shelf speakers for people back in the 70s and 80s. You can make it sound good anywhere. They translate. That's what we're talking about when you hear translate. It's like translating a sentence from English to French. If you read it in French, does it have the same meaning as it did in English? It translates well, So these guys translate music very well to any output platform. But the other thing they do is they really put a spotlight on the mid-range frequencies, the mid-range and upper mid-range. The reason we want that is it allows us to sort of hear if maybe too much is going on there. Are we getting a little bit too much, maybe 7K or 8K or maybe, 9K or 2K? Is there too much happening there? Do I need to really go back and maybe reassess my guitars? Or is the vocal coming through against all the other sort of mid to upper mid range frequencies? And the Yamaha NS10s really bring that out, and they allow you to hear things sort of in a different way. So I'd liken the Yamaha NS10s to the Solo BEs. It's a bit like if you're going to clean your apartment sometimes, if you get down on the ground and then look at your apartment from a totally different angle, you'll see things that you missed that, as opposed to if you're just standing there looking at everything like this. If you get on the floor and start doing yoga, oh my gosh, I got it. Oh, there's a stain there. There's a this. So looking at the mix from a different angle can help you sort of clean things up in a way that you wouldn't be able to if you're looking at it from a different angle, the focals. But anyway, so referencing is really important. Having a good room, you're catching those first reflections. That's so important. Keeping your speakers away from the wall. Just reducing your noise floor. I've talked about that too on this channel. So making sure that The fridge is off, the windows are closed. Maybe you want to record or mix at night, when there's less sort of traffic in the hallways, depending on where you live. That's really important too. But the most important thing I would say is just treating the room like it's more important than your computer, your plugins, your whatever. Because if you have a good room with good speakers, you're going to have a good result, I think. So hopefully that clears up some confusion and gives you some starting points from which to work in your own space. You don't need $1,000,000 and all the rest of it to have a really good space and a really good sound. I mean, this is not the Ritz Carlton. This is far from it, but I'm able to get a good sound that I really trust here because I learned a lot and I really took care to control the room. So I think you can do the same thing too. I mean, some couches, some sneakers on the ground, a bed, some pillows. I mean, that's absorptive material right there. You don't have to go out and buy a big pack of rock wool or fiberglass, but that helps for sure. Learning how to build your own panels helps too. And you can learn all that stuff online, as I did while I learned some of that stuff in school. But anyway, food for thought. Hopefully that gets you started, and thanks so much for watching.